I've been running in these woods for as long as I can remember, but this might make me change my mind. The story began at around 6:30 p.m. I had finished eating and decided to go on a run, as usual. I always use the same path across the street, run for about 1 kilometer, and pass the gate that goes into the woods. Something important to note is that the trail I use into the forest is separated about halfway through. One path is paved and the other isn't. I usually go into the unpaved path first, and then turn into the paved one after about 3 kilometers. Nothing ever really goes wrong. I meet some rare people walking their dogs, but other than that, I'm pretty alone. At least, I thought I was. I'd been running for a while now when I heard a notification coming from my phone, an airdrop notification. Since I didn't want to make it look like I was worried, I kept running for a couple minutes and then stopped to change the music. I opened the airdrop dreadfully. Who the hell was sending me stuff? I was pretty sure I was alone. I clicked on the drop and my heart sunk. It was a Snapchat picture of me running with the caption, "You look good." I didn't turn around. Instead, I kept running like nothing happened until I reached a certain point. You see, the forest is surrounded by a fence to stop children from coming in unsupervised, and I didn't like that rule when I was little, so my friend and I cut a hole in it. When I was aligned with that hole, I quickly turned and buried myself into the forest, aiming for my escape. I could hear ruffling behind me, and I still didn't turn back. When I finally reached the hole, I jumped through it and absolutely booked it to the fire station that was a couple streets down. The last thing I could hear when leaving the forest was an angry huff and metal meeting metal. I still don't know who it was or what they wanted from me, but I never ran in that forest, ever again. When I was 18, I lived in a detached garage apartment that had a second apartment upstairs. My apartment was an efficiency and only had walls without doors to separate the rooms. The second floor was being renovated and no one rented it. At night, I would hear footsteps and it sounded like it came from upstairs. I could hear someone going up and down the stairs outside at night. One time, I had put my St. Bernard out on a tie to potty, and I went outside when I heard scratching on the steps to find her wrapped around the stairs in a way that she couldn't have done by herself. I started having friends stay over because I thought I was imagining things, since it was my first time living alone. One night, I was laying in bed and I heard a noise that woke me up. I looked up half awake and saw a shadowy figure at the foot of my bed. I could see the outline of what looked like a thin man or woman with shaggy hair and a top hat. I told myself I was just being paranoid and imagining things. I grabbed a hold of my dog and covered us up with a blanket, telling myself it wasn't real. A few weeks later, my car had a baseball thrown through the window. I was out taping my window, and my neighbor came out to talk to me. A young couple rented the house on the same lot. I asked her if she knew if the landlord had either been working on the upstairs unit or maybe rented it out, because I kept hearing noises. She told me no and offered to have her husband go take a look upstairs in the unit. While he was inspecting, she started telling me to be aware of a homeless man who was seen in the alley behind us. I asked her to describe him, and she tells me he's tall, thin, dirty long hair, and always wearing a funny hat like the Mad Hatter. Her husband comes back and tells me that the door was unlocked, but the floor isn't done in the apartment upstairs, and there's no possible way someone could be up there because there was no place to step. I called my mom and she helped me move. While I was loading the U-Haul, I found 3 house keys in random places in my yard. All of them went to my door. I'm pretty sure this dude was just living with me, and I had no idea. I'm 17 years old and from Canada. Where I live is quite isolated. Not isolated to the point where I'm in the middle of nowhere, but there isn't many people in my town. A few months ago, a really old couple who had been our neighbors since I was born were moved into a caring home, and the house was put up for sale. My dad had a friend at the house selling firm, so he knew when it got sold, and it got sold about 1 month after they moved out. My mom and dad were working, but I was at home, since the whole COVID thing made us get homeschooled. Someone knocked at my door. I'm not really a fan of social interactions, especially when home alone, because believe me, I've watched enough scary shit to know. After about 4 knocks, I knew they wouldn't stop, so I went downstairs and opened the door. But I made sure that I was still on the phone call to my friend, and I made it clear that I was talking to someone, as when I answered I said, "Give me a second, Hunter," just as a precaution. I answered the door to an older guy. He looked rough, but a type of rough that was well groomed, if that made sense. I said, "What's up?" and he explained he's the new neighbor. I didn't know what to say, so I was just like, "Hey, what's up?" He asked if he could come in because it was snowing pretty bad outside, and he just came to inspect his property. Knowing my mom would shout at me if I got off on the wrong foot with the new neighbor, I let him in. He just sat on the sofa whilst we talked, and he asked questions about the neighborhood. After about 10 minutes, he asked if he could use the bathroom, and then he would be on his way. I said sure, it's upstairs on the left. He went up, and I was talking to my friend still. He was up there for about 5 minutes, so I shouted up, "Hey, are you okay?" Not that I was concerned, I just wanted this guy gone. He replied, "Yeah, it's all smooth sailing up here," or something like that. When he came down, he wasn't wearing his jacket anymore. Instead, he had it rolled in a ball in his hands. At the time, I didn't take note, but the more I think about it, the more sense it makes. I see him out and say bye and stuff, and that's that. I talk to my friend on FaceTime and then go upstairs to my room. Now, I have OCD, so I know I'd never leave my door just a bit open. I think to myself, what has this dude done as I look around? The only thing I noticed that was out of place was my drawer. The middle one was just a bit open. I check it, and all of my underwear is gone. I'm like, what the hell? I check my dirty laundry basket behind my door, and all of my dirty underwear are gone from that, too. I call my mom and ask her about the underwear and if she's done any laundry. She says no, and I freak out and call my dad and ask him about the neighbors. He says, "Oh yeah, I've spoken to the dad, British guy, lovely fella." My heart sunk as I realized I let a random guy into my house, and God knows why he wanted my underwear. I'm a student in a South American country. I speak English and French, so I tutor people in my free time to make some money to buy textbooks and medicines. Because of the pandemic, many of my students could not pay anymore, so I was left with no one. Until this guy showed up. He's like 50, loud and weird. He has a daughter my age, I'm 19, and a wife, and yet every time he talks about them, he's either trash-talking his wife or saying stuff about his daughter, like, she's really sexy, and talking about her boyfriends. Really scary. I've been tempted to stop teaching him, but until I find other students, I can't. The thing is, we live in the same city, and we have not yet met. Yet, he's obsessed with finding out my address. He says stuff like, I'm beautiful, or it's so strange that I don't have a boyfriend. He draws, but he doesn't draw suns and flowers. He only draws naked women, and he draws them while looking at me during our classes. Luckily, these are online classes, but I swear every time I have to teach him 5 times a week, I want to die. He always talks about how hot he was when he was young, about how many women he used to sleep with. He says the most sexist things. He has another daughter who is 9 years old. Fucking 9 years old. And he always says that he is worried about her turning out gay because he can deal with a whore daughter, but not a lesbian. It's just non-stop inappropriate comments about women, about me, about my sexual life. He knows I'm struggling with money, and he always takes advantage of that. He always asks me for my address. I laugh and play dumb, change topics, but he insists. He says things like, I want to know where you live so we can hang out. He's so awful. But last week, it got really scary. He said he had another student for me. I said great. Next morning, I woke up to 5 messages of him asking me personal info for this new student, and of course, asking for my address. The thing is, he found a fucking address. My last address. I moved some months ago, and the address he found and showed me was my last address. I'm not stupid. I have never put my personal info online. The guy is a programmer. He works with computers, and he's really good at it. And I'm scared, because the only place he could have found that address is a government website, as it is listed as my current address. I have not changed it. He also found my full name, but I only gave him my first. I always use VPNs. I have a full system protecting my phone and laptop that my cousin installed, and I have been trying to search my address online, and it just doesn't show up. I'm freaked out. Every time I go out, I'm afraid I will encounter him on the street. Let's just hope we will never meet. So, I've been living alone in a foreign country for a year already. The last months I've been taking a ferry to move, because the metro is usually crowded, stressful, and in COVID times, a big no for me. So, the ferry is always the best option. At least, this was my thought until this week. On Monday, a random guy, probably 30 to 35, sat next to me on the ferry and tried to talk. I'm not good with the language yet, so I let him understand that I didn't know what he was saying. He kept talking and showed me his phone. He had just taken a picture of me. I asked him to delete it, but he didn't understand. so I just ignored him to make him stop. It was irrelevant at the moment. On Tuesday, I noticed the guy from the ferry again, but this time, he greeted me and called me by my name, which of course surprised me, since I don't know him. He sat next to me and kept talking non-stop, but this time, he went over familiar and tried to hug me. For my luck, a woman noticed it and sat between him and me, pretending to be my friend. On Wednesday, I used the metro instead of the ferry, so it was normal. On Thursday, I took the ferry, and this guy was there again. This time, he sat far away. When the ferry reached the other side, I noticed the guy was following me, so I changed route and went to a bus stop, which is just next to the ferry port. As it was late night, there weren't many people around. I was scared, so I sat in the bus stop, and there was a couple waiting, so I felt safe. But the stalker came and sat next to me, and suddenly held my arm while saying, "Come, come, come," and trying to take me with him. At this moment, I just held his arm tight and asked for help. The couple next to me called the police, and I did the report. I mentioned that on Monday he was taking pictures of me, and that he might be doing the same with other girls. Police asked for his phone, and to my surprise, he handed it over to them with no problems, like he was sure that nothing was going to happen. When police checked his phone, they found pictures of me, but not just from Monday. This guy has been taking pictures of me for months. Not just in the ferry, but also in the parking site, and even outside my home. Besides my pictures, they found pictures of different girls which I believe he has been following for months as well. The worst thing about this whole situation is that when I filed the report to the police, they couldn't do anything about it because this guy hasn't hurt me. So, right now, I'm looking for a new place to move. I asked my cousin if she'd ever had any bizarre or interesting stories working as a surgical assistant. Not only had I not expected to hear anything interesting enough to post here, but in truth, I never imagined I'd hear anything as horrendous as this. I actually started to get ill typing this up. Brace yourselves. I'm a surgical technician who works in the intensive care unit. We got a patient in 2010 who was a level 1 on the emergency severity index. Level 1s are people in need of immediate life-saving care. In short, they're the most important patients in the hospital, though to admit that goes against our code of ethics. We had a man wheeled in on a ventilator, and his skin was jaundice yellow with odd patches of blue. Not only that, but he was projectile vomiting blood. It truly looked like something out of a zombie film. He was covered in dirt with a long white beard, thin as a bone, ribs visible as a skeleton and sunburned all over. He was screaming that his stomach was going to burst while intermittently crying out for his mother, whom he said he could see in the room. Not only did he have something life-threatening occurring, but he was also hallucinating. The man stunk like nothing I'd ever smelled. We all used smelling salts as if he were already a rotting corpse. We asked him what he had eaten, and in between unintelligible mutterings, he said that he eats dirt. "It's all I can eat. I'm homeless." We immediately gave him an abdominal x-ray, and what should have been normal and dark came up as white inside his lungs as well. We immediately put him under and started performing a partial gastrectomy after a scope which indicated compaction of undigested earth. A bronchoscopy was done to see how much buildup was in his lungs, but by this time they'd filled up with blood. He died on the surgical table. Unfortunately, dirt goes in like dust, some going into his lungs and the rest into his intestines. Though we can't perform an autopsy in the ER, we did a full abdominal and intestinal scope. His guts from the abdominal cavity to the jejunum, top of the small intestine connecting to the esophagus, was not only filled with rotting, undigested earth, but foraging through it were literal earthworms, maybe 100 or more. The guy was a 6-foot-deep corpse even when he was alive. They'd made a home inside this guy's entire insides, and his lungs, well, the fact that he lived so long and was able to breathe was some sort of divine coincidence. The coroner said that his insides were a worm farm, and days after the man, named Abner, had died, they were still alive and cohabitating. He even said they'd been breeding and had birthed babies, like some sort of death stew. He'd also formed an army of tapeworms, intermingling in with the other worms, eating each other. The tapeworms were actually attacking the earthworms, and riddled all through him were chunks of worm guts. It was a fucking feeding frenzy. No wonder he felt like he was going to burst. His stomach had stretched to twice its normal size. Had he lived, 3/4 of his stomach would have needed to be removed, and anything more than a few green beans could have torn the tiny ball his stomach now was in half. Never in my life had I been witness to something so gut-wrenching and macabre. So please, everyone, if you're truly starving, find a food kitchen or shelter. Do not chow down on parasite-infested earth for, well, however long.